At my husband's funeral, the woman he was cheating on me with stood up in the middle of the service, turned to the crowd, and said, "He never loved her. She meant me." Her voice echoed across the church like she had every right to be there. Her words hung in the air, heavy and sharp, like a slap I wasn't allowed to react to. The room fell silent. People turned to look at me, some with pity, some in shock, some just waiting to see what I'd do. But I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just sat there staring at the woman who had stolen my husband's heart, or at least whatever was left of it. My son's hand was in mine. My mother's grip tightened around my shoulder. My whole body wanted to explode. But I stayed still because what I knew, what she didn't, was that the story wasn't over. A few seconds later, our family lawyer, Mr. Roland Tate, walked calmly to the front of the room. He held a small wooden box in both hands. Everyone watched him, unsure if this was part of the service or some kind of last-minute announcement. He turned to her, the mistress, and said without hesitation, "He left this just for you." She took the box from him like it was a gift, like she'd won something. She opened it and then she screamed. Before the funeral, I didn't cry. I couldn't. Not for him. Not yet. Julian had been dead for 6 days. A car accident. Rain-slicked road. Late at night. They said it was instant, but those details didn't matter to me. What mattered was the silence that followed. The kind of silence that doesn't feel peaceful, just heavy. I remember the morning of the funeral vividly. The smell of coffee I couldn't bring myself to drink. The way my mother kept adjusting her pearls like it gave her something to hold on to. The sound of Caleb, my 10-year-old son, zipping up his tiny black jacket, trying to act like this was just another grown-up event, like he didn't know his world had cracked in half. "You look beautiful," my mom said softly as she fastened a silver pin to my coat, like a widow should. I didn't respond. I looked in the mirror and barely recognized myself. Hair pinned back, makeup hiding the circles under my eyes, lips painted in the same shade I wore on our wedding day. It felt like a cruel joke. How I had once worn this same color with hope in my heart and now wore it like armor. The ride to the church was quiet. I sat between my mother and Caleb in the back seat of her old Buick. He clutched my hand the whole way, but I could feel his questions buzzing beneath the surface. He hadn't asked about the accident since the day it happened. He just kept asking if Dad had really loved him. That was the part that hurt the most. When we arrived, the first thing I noticed was how full the church was. I didn't expect that many people. I wondered how many of them really knew Julian. The real Julian. The man I'd loved, yes, but also the man who had lied to me, who had smiled while erasing pieces of me behind my back. Most of them came in carrying casseroles and sympathy, but some brought whispers and sideways glances. We were seated at the front next to the flowers I'd picked out days earlier. Lies and white roses. He hated them, but I didn't care. The service was for him, yes, but it was also mine. My moment to say goodbye, even if I didn't know what I was saying goodbye to, the man he was or the man I thought he was. As the organ played, I scanned the room. Friends, family, colleagues, even a few of Julian's old high school buddies I hadn't seen in years. But then I saw her. She was near the back at first, standing under the archway like she was deciding whether to enter, slender, overdressed in a red dress that shimmered every time she moved. She stood out like a warning flare in a sea of black and gray. Delilah Hart. I didn't need an introduction. I had seen her name before on receipts, on hotel invoices, on a necklace he had bought one Christmas when I got a sweater. And now she was here. I leaned toward my mother and whispered, "She came." My mom didn't ask who. She didn't have to. Her lips tightened and she reached for my hand. Delilah walked down the aisle slowly, deliberately, like she owned her place. In this story, her eyes met mine for a split second. There was no shame in them, just entitlement, like she was here to collect something. I could feel Caleb watching her too, confused, unsure why his mom suddenly stiffened beside him. I smoothed his hair, kissed the top of his head, and whispered, "Just listen to the nice things people say about Daddy." He nodded, still too young to understand the lies adults tell at funerals. When the pastor began to speak, I stared at Julian's photograph on the altar. It was the one I had chosen, the one where he looked happiest. I remember taking it. We were in Savannah on a family trip just after Caleb was born. Julian had been laughing at something Caleb did, or maybe pretending to. I stared at that photo and tried to remember what it felt like to love him without doubt. I tried to feel something clean, something warm, but all I could feel was the betrayal beneath, the grief. And as Delilah sat just a few rows behind me, crossing her legs and flicking her hair like she was waiting for a spotlight, I realized something. The day wasn't going to be about closure. It was going to be about truth and pain. And maybe, if I was lucky, freedom. The pastor was mid-sentence when she rose. Delilah Hart, wearing red like it was a celebration, stood up in the center of the crowded church and turned toward the front with the kind of calm that always comes before a storm. Her heels clicked once against the wooden floor as she stepped forward. People turned in their seats. A few whispered her name. Some had seen her before, maybe at Julian's work events or out in public. Others didn't know her at all, but could feel that something was off, a tension thick enough to taste. The pastor paused, confused. He looked to me for direction, unsure if this was some kind of planned tribute. I gave him nothing. Delilah didn't wait for permission. She turned to face the pews and lifted her chin. "I know some of you don't know me," she said loud enough for every corner of the sanctuary to hear. "But I knew Julian better than most of you ever could." People shifted in their seats. My mother leaned in and hissed, "We should stop this." "No," I said. "Let her talk," because I wanted to hear what story she'd built for herself. I wanted to know how far she'd go to rewrite the truth. Delilah placed one hand on her chest and said, "I was in his life for 5 years. 5. And not in secret. He told me everything. How unhappy he was, how trapped he felt, how he couldn't be who he really was at home." Some people gasped. Others avoided looking at me. Delilah's voice wavered like she thought she was the one grieving. "He told me he only stayed because of his son," she added, "not because he loved her." She looked straight at me when she said it. There was no apology in her eyes, just triumph like she believed she had won. I didn't flinch, but inside I was burning. Caleb tugged at my hand. "Mommy, why is that lady saying that?" he whispered. I squeezed his hand. "Ignore her, baby." The room fell into an eerie stillness. No one knew what to do. The pastor tried to step in. "Ma'am, this really isn't." But before he could finish, a voice from the far side of the room cut through the air. "Miss Hart," said Roland Tate, our family lawyer, as he stood and began walking slowly down the aisle. All eyes turned to him. He held a small wooden box in his hands, polished, plain, almost like a jewelry case, but heavier, denser. Delilah froze. Her expression shifted slightly, confused, then curious. Mr. Tate approached the front, stopped just before the pulpit, and turned toward her. "Julian left very specific instructions in his will," he said calmly. "He requested this be delivered to you today publicly." Delilah blinked. Her arms dropped to her sides. She looked unsure for the first time since she walked in, but she took the box slowly, like someone receiving an award. I watched her fingers trace the edge of the lid. Her nails were painted the same wine red as her dress. In that moment, the church was silent again, not in mourning, but in anticipation, a quiet kind of suspense that wrapped itself around everyone in the room. People leaned forward in their seats. My mother sat rigid beside me. Caleb was still. Even the pastor stood back, watching. Delilah glanced at me one last time, smug and steady, then opened the box. What she expected, I'll never know. A letter, maybe. A ring. Some last profession of love. But what she got was something else entirely. Her eyes landed on it, and she went pale. Her mouth opened slightly as if trying to speak, but no words came out. Then all at once, she snapped the lid shut and let out a scream that shattered the air. A raw, guttural sound. More than just shock. It was rage, hurt, humiliation. She dropped the box on the floor, backed away like it had burned her, and stumbled down the aisle. Gasps followed her exit. The door slammed behind her with a violent echo that seemed to shake the windows. The box sat at the front untouched. Mr. Tate turned to me briefly, then nodded. A small private signal. I didn't look at it. I didn't need to. I already knew what was inside. Julian had planned this. He'd betrayed me while he lived, but in death, He'd written one final truth, one she couldn't escape, and one I didn't need to say a single word to deliver. The night before the funeral, I sat at my kitchen table with Mr. Tate, the lawyer Julian had trusted for years. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the clock ticking on the wall. Caleb was asleep upstairs. My mother was in the guest room saying the rosary for the third time that day. Mr. Tate opened Julian's will and slid it across the table. I didn't reach for it. "There's something unusual," he said. A clause Julian added shortly before he died. He left a box for someone named Delilah Hart. "Do you know who that is?" I laughed before I meant to. Not out of humor, more like disbelief. "Oh, I know who she is." He looked at me carefully, trying to gauge whether I was okay. I wasn't, but I'd stopped expecting to be. I leaned forward. "What's in the box?" Mr. Tate hesitated. "A photograph and a message handwritten, sealed in the box." He asked that it be delivered during the service publicly. He was very specific. I stared at the wood grain on the table, thinking about how this man, my husband, had crafted one final performance, even in death. One last piece of control, one final message. He really wanted her to see it in front of everyone, I asked. Mr. Tate nodded. His exact words were, "I want her to hear the truth where she can't twist it." A part of me felt sick. Another part felt something like vindication. I looked up at Mr. Tate. "Then do it." He looked surprised. "Are you sure?" "No," I said, "but do it." Anyway, I had spent so much of my life biting my tongue, preserving peace for the sake of appearances, for the sake of my son. But peace built on silence is just a lie in slow motion. And I was done lying, even if I had to let Julian tell the truth through the ashes he left behind. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about everything I had sacrificed to be his wife. I had bent myself backwards to be enough. I had blamed myself for the distance between us. I'd wondered what I lacked that drove him into someone else's arms. But the truth wasn't in me. It was in him, in his choices, in the way he used charm, like a currency, and loyalty like a leash. By morning, I had made my decision. I wouldn't confront Delilah. I wouldn't lash out or make a scene. I'd let her speak if she wanted to. Let her stand in front of everyone and spin whatever fantasy she needed to believe because I knew what was coming. I dressed deliberately that day, not for him, for myself. I wore the black suit he never liked, the one he said made me look too serious. I wore the heels I hadn't touched since my job interview 5 years ago. I pulled my hair back tight and put on the lipstick I used to wear when I still believed he loved me. I wanted to look like someone who had already survived the worst. At the church, when Delilah walked in like she belonged there, I didn't flinch. When she stood up and declared that Julian never loved me, I didn't speak. Not because I was afraid, but because I was done fighting ghosts with my voice. Let her talk, I thought. Let her strut and smile and believe she held the upper hand. Let her believe she was the secret he kept closest to his heart because I knew what was in that box. Julian's truth wasn't kind. It wasn't noble or redemptive. It was cruel in its honesty. The note he left for her was short, only a sentence, but it was enough to unravel everything she thought they had. Mr. Tate had shown it to me. I had read it once and only once to Delilah. "For the years I stole from both of you, I never loved you. I only needed you to feel wanted when I didn't deserve to be." He hadn't written me a letter, no apology, no explanation. Maybe that was his final insult or his quiet acknowledgement that he owed me more than words could ever repay. Either way, I didn't need anything from him anymore. I gave Mr. Tate the green light. Let her open the box. Let the truth be loud for once. Because sometimes, silence is powerful. And sometimes letting someone expose themselves is more satisfying than any revenge you could ever plan. The air inside the church felt different the moment she touched the lid. It wasn't just quiet. It was expectant. Like the entire room knew. Something was coming but didn't know what. I could feel eyes bouncing between me, Delilah, and the box in her hands. Caleb was stuck close to my side. My mother hadn't moved an inch since the lawyer stepped forward. Delilah stood at the front, framed by white lies and the picture of my husband smiling at a life he'd already ruined. She held the wooden box delicately, like it was something sacred. I wondered if she thought there'd be a ring inside, or a letter, telling her he had always loved her. Maybe she believed he'd left me behind in death the same way she thought he'd left me in life. But Julian wasn't that clean. He was messy, and his truth was always heavier than his lies. She unlatched the box slowly, like she wanted to savor the moment. Then she saw it. At first, she didn't react. She just stared inside. Her fingers hovered over the contents, frozen. Her face didn't change. No tearful smile. No sudden gasp. Just stillness, as if her brain refused to believe what her eyes were seeing. Then it cracked. Her mouth parted. Her eyes widened. She pulled out a single photograph. It was a candid shot. Her and Julian smiling on a beach, arms wrapped around each other. I'd never seen it before, but I knew right away it wasn't one of their hidden rendezvous. It was something she must have taken proudly, believing it meant more than it did. She turned it over. That's when she made the sound. Not a gasp, not a sob, a scream. One sharp, broken sound that pierced the entire room. The kind of scream you make when a lie you've built your life around collapses in one breath. She dropped the photograph and stumbled backward. Her heels wobbled. The box hit the ground, the lid swinging open. She looked at me, her eyes full of fury, confusion, and heartbreak. But I didn't move. Mr. Tate stepped forward and picked up the fallen photograph, careful not to speak. A woman in the second row stood and said, "What's going on?" Delilah turned, face flushed, chest heaving. He lied to me. He told me he loved me. He said he was leaving her. Whispers erupted across the pews. Some people shook their heads. Some leaned closer together, murmuring like gossip carried more weight than grief. She clutched her chest, looking for someone, anyone, to save her from the embarrassment crawling across her skin. She wasn't just heartbroken. She was exposed. Her entire identity, her role in Julian's life, unraveling in front of strangers. Then she did something I didn't expect. She walked toward me. One step, two, then three. Her eyes locked on mine, wild and trembling. I stood up slowly, placing Caleb behind me and resting my hand on the pew. "Why?" she asked. Her voice cracked like glass underfoot. "Why would he do this to me?" I looked at her for what felt like a full minute. Then I said clearly and without emotion, "Because he did it to me first." And then I sat back down. She didn't reply. She just stood there blinking like she'd been slapped. Her arms dropped to her sides, and she turned to leave. Her heels echoed louder this time. Not sharp, not proud, just uneven and uncertain. She shoved the church doors open and vanished into the sunlight. Everyone stared, some at the door, some at the box, and a few at me. I didn't give them anything. No tears, no smirk, no whispered, "I told you so." I had nothing left to prove. Julian's voice was never heard that day, but his message rang louder than any eulogy. He left her with nothing but the truth, and in doing so finally gave me the only thing he never could while alive: clarity. After the funeral, I didn't go to the reception. I let the guests file out, their eyes heavy with things they weren't brave enough to say. They gave me soft nods, weak smiles, quick hugs. A few offered shallow condolences about how grief can make people act strange, pretending they hadn't just witnessed a woman get emotionally undressed in public. Let them talk. I walked Caleb out to the car. He was quiet, clutching the little wooden cross the funeral home had handed out. When we got inside, he finally spoke. "Mom, who was that lady?" I didn't lie. "She was someone your dad knew," I said. "Someone who thought she was important to him." He looked out the window for a few seconds, then asked, "Did she hurt you?" Paused, considering the question. How do you explain betrayal to a 10-year-old without making them feel like they came from something broken? "She didn't hurt me," I said finally. "He did, but I'm not going to carry that forever. And neither are you." He nodded like he understood more than I gave him credit for, then leaned against my arm as we drove home. That night, the house felt different. Not because it was quieter. Julian hadn't exactly filled it with laughter near the end, but because for the first time, the silence wasn't suffocating. It was space. It was mine. I walked into our bedroom. No, my bedroom now. I stood at the doorway, taking in the bed we used to share, the nightstand he never cleaned, the drawer where I'd found the receipts that started the unraveling. It didn't feel like a war zone anymore. just a room. I opened the closet and took out the last suit he wore, the one from our anniversary dinner a year before he died. I ran my fingers along the lapel, trying to remember what it felt like to love him without questioning every word, every late-night phone call, every distant look. That version of him existed once, but loving someone isn't the same as knowing them. And I didn't really know Julian, not until it was too late. I laid the suit on the bed, folded it neatly, and placed it in a donation box. I didn't need it anymore. I didn't need any of it. The next morning, I made pancakes for Caleb. I played music while we ate. He laughed for the first time in weeks. And I realized something. I wasn't mourning Julian anymore. I was mourning myself. The version of me that believed love had to be earned. That loyalty meant silence. That strength was measured by how much pain you could endure without flinching. But that version of me was gone. I'm not angry at Delilah. Not anymore. I think she loved him in her own way. Or maybe she just loved being chosen the way I once did. But love built on lies isn't love at all. It's survival. And I'm done surviving. I want to live. Julian thought the truth would hurt her. And it did. But it freed me. And maybe in the most twisted way, that was his final gift. People always say funerals are for the living, not the dead. I used to think that meant closure. Now, I think it means choice. You get to choose what kind of person you'll be when the worst parts of your story are over. You get to decide whether the pain becomes your prison or your turning point. I chose the latter. As I stood by the window that morning, coffee in hand, watching Caleb chase the dog in the backyard, I realized I wasn't waiting for anything anymore. Not an apology, not answers, not someone to save me from the grief. I had saved myself. If this story moved you or made you think about love, betrayal, or strength in a different way, share it. Someone else might need to hear it too. Let me know in the comments what you would have done in my place. Would you have stayed silent or would you have said something that day? And if you want more real stories that cut deep about heartbreak, healing, and everything in between, make sure you subscribe to the channel, hit that like button if this one hit you, and don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you don't miss what's coming next. Thanks for listening to my truth. I'll see you in the next.